There have been many great teachers in my life that came at just the right time. Mrs. Ellis, who found me in second grade and got me out of ESL classes and onto her carpet to learn about Dr. King and win the readathon. Honey, you need to get back to class. Mr. Cheeseman, who taught me about civil rights and encouraged me to make films about social justice in middle school.
People and killed. His plan is to lead the slaves in a violent uprising.
Miss Tysowski, who taught me about O. Henry, Lord of the Flies, and to treat people like I want to be treated.
That's what Poe was doing with arabesque language and shifting point of view.
But there was one person who stood out above anyone else, and that was Bobby. Oh, honey, what's this word? She said to me. Smush. We were in her house on Bluff Street. This is where she met everyone from class. She would read your story to you and then stop and correct things on the page if they sounded off to her. Honey, this is an awful word. Listen to how it sounds. Smush. It was my first ever story. I'd entered Jack Kerouac School as a poetry student, but shortly after our first meeting, she laid it on me. Honey, she said, you need to come to fiction with us. All these poets just want to be rock stars. So just like that, I reapplied as a fiction student and spent most of my time with Bobby talking our stories. She would launch, her word.
Moving right along.
And then it was my turn. Oh, honey, she would say to me, a great writer is a great talker, and a great talker is a great writer. We spent most days on her back porch near the rose garden telling stories. She'd talk about her first marriage, living in Bolinas.
Most marriages that do end, that one went on for about 5 years too long.
Lots of stories about Joe Brainerd. I went to Joe's apartment one day, she said, and I saw this pile of books on the left side of his bed and another on the right. One for what he'd been through and the other for what was left. The side on the right was what he'd been through, and it was stacked so high it was nearly falling over. And I asked him, Joe, what are you reading? And he said, everything. When we weren't writing or listening to each other's stories, we mostly talked about love. You know, she said to me one day, Piers, you can't write about love when you're in love. Love was Bobby's favorite topic. She loved to dish on relationships. Oh, honey, she said, when I visited with my second wife years later, I like this one. Of course, she knew how fragile relationships were at the same time. We always picked the crazy ones, she told me. Love would be so boring otherwise. When we weren't talking our stories, Bobby and I were usually taking walks around Boulder. She loved walking. I remember one time I came over and her second husband was there, but our daily walks weren't going to be interrupted just because she had a guest. Bob, Piers, Bob, she said. Hi, I said. It was my first time meeting Bob in person, although I had heard the stories. All right, she said, let's go. I knew how difficult it was for Bobby when her husband told her that there could only be one writer in the house and she had to write in secret when everyone was asleep. You got to write these stories down, I would tell her. Oh no, honey, she would tell me. I'll write them later. She thought it wasn't nice to write about someone when they were still alive. It's better to do it after they're gone, she told me. We didn't say anything about Bob. We were halfway down Bluff Street near an apple tree that had real apples, and we both got one and started eating them before we started launching again. I started off talking about how my mother was convinced the word organic was actually orgasmic and told all her coworkers at the Jewish Community Center in her thick Persian accent that she got the most amazing orgasmic pair. That sounds about right, Bobby said and laughed. Bobby loves stories about my life between Iran and America. She was the one who encouraged me to keep writing them. If I ever did anything else, she'd tell me straight away. What's this? I had just finished reading an experimental story that kept shifting time and place. You don't like it? No, she said. Get back to your stories. I suppose we were pushing each other beyond our comfort zones. I'd tell her to go out there and do more readings, and she'd make me talk to other people she thought I should be talking to. Call Joanne, she told me. You'd like each other. Just call her? Yes, she said. I spent 2 hours on the phone with Joanne Kiger. I can't remember what we talked about. I just remember her looking for something the whole time. Phone calls with Bobby were a lot easier. I'd call from LA or wherever I was after I left Boulder. Oh, honey, she would say, how are you? We usually dished on relationships or talked about what we were reading. I'm reading another romance novel, she told me. Joanne and I love these things. When I found out Bobby passed away, I was on my way to see her for my film Sometimes I Dream in Farsi. I had finally gotten around to doing my stories, and I wanted to talk to her. So me and Achilles, another of her students, and my cousin ended up going to her old house on Bluff Street and listening to her read poems on our phones. Bobby is someone that understood a long time ago that we will always be unfinished, Achilles said afterwards,
We will always be unfinished
and that we can only be the witnesses
to our own unfinishedness.
After Achilles said that, I talked about the dream I had just after I heard the news of her death. I didn't put it in the film, but I told it right there in her front yard. I was in my room in New York, just between sleep and wakefulness, when I saw us right there in the front yard together. Bobby was young and in his sundress with flowers, and there was this VW bus parked in the driveway. She walked me over to the back, and there was Bob, and she pulled out a trunk from the back and showed me some of the poems and drawings we had done together. This is all my stuff with Piers. Then another young woman came up to me. You okay? She asked me. I suddenly got overcome with emotion. Then I started crying uncontrollably. She patted me on the back and I woke up. When I did, there was this gust of wind flowing through my room and swirling all around me. I'm not sure what Bobby would say about this, but when I told the story on camera, a gust of wind started blowing hard again, all through the end of my launching. And I'm lying down in bed and there's this breeze coming in, almost like an ocean.
Yeah.
So it's and then it goes, and then it comes again. Did you see that? My cousin said. That was crazy. What? The wind started going crazy just when you mentioned the wind, she said, and then paused. You gotta put that in the movie.
تنهای تنها تنها تو دنیا من خسته و دور به سوی فردا تنهای تنها تنها تو دنیا من خسته و دور به سوی فردا تو این جدایی من بودم و شب من بودم و عشق قلب تمنا تو این جدایی من بودم و شب من بودم و عشق قلب تمنا
My mother's people were incredible storytellers, so that when there was no electricity, and as it would get dark, they'd put kerosene lamps out on the table. And everyone would sit around the table, and the children, if they could get by with it, would be leaning against the wall, sitting on the floor. But of course, as soon as the adults' attention was caught by any of the children were sent to bed. But until that happened, there were these ongoing stories, so that those stories, I realized, got honed through this process